All right, so I don't forget that. Just another minute or so, and we'll get started. Okay, so the Book of Ruth is, in some ways, unlike the other books of the Bible. I want to, before I even talk about how it's different, who wrote it? When did they write it? The answers to those questions are we don't know. But there is some possibility that the book was written by a woman because it's all about women. The major characters are women, with one exception, at least. So, actually, before I talk about this, I do want to mention one thing, which came up last time, and we left it kind of hanging. You might remember that I talked about Rabbi Akiva and love and why that was important to him, and story about him and how he met his wife and so on. And I think it was Sandy who said that she heard that he was a convert, strikingly relevant to our study this week. It turns out that there are traditions, not that he was a convert, but that he was descended from converts. So there is such a tradition. I think it's an interesting tradition in that, and it's not a universal tradition at all, but it is an opinion. And it may be that
Jane,
part of it
I'm
is,
on Zoom right now.
Sylvia, you need to mute if you're talking.
I did. Okay. I took care of it.
Okay, mute anyway, just in case.
I can't find the mute. Oh, can you mute me? Oh, okay, here it is.
Good.
It says,
All right.
no, it's not muted.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So, as I was saying, yeah, so it's interesting to me that there would be such a tradition, that this very important and very central figure in rabbinic literature might be descended from converts, because it shows a really positive attitude towards converts, an attitude we don't always see in rabbinic literature. And I want to hold that thought because I want to talk about it in the context of Ruth. So let's get back to Ruth. And first of all, as I was saying, don't know who wrote it. Might have been a woman. Women are all very positive in this story. In fact, everybody is positive in this story. And everybody seems to act out of good motives, which is really striking. I mean, if you think about other biblical stories, it's never the case. I mean, everybody has their flaws and so on. This is a really idyllic story. And I think that's part of its charm. When was it written? Unclear. I mean, it describes a period I'll talk about in a minute that was.
Oh my God.
It was written way, way after that. So it's not at all clear when it was written. Current scholarship seems to suggest that it might have been written during the period of the Babylonian exile. And important among the people who returned from the Babylonian exile. And I think that, if it's true, is also significant for reasons I'm going to talk about. Remember that the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. And then 75 years later, the people begin to come back from Babylonia as the Persian king Cyrus has defeated the Babylonian king and allowing the Jews to go back. So that gives you some sense of around the year 500, maybe a bit earlier, a bit later, rather hard to say, 500 before the common era. Okay, so let's look at the story itself. and begin right with chapter 1. I'm going to share my screen. Do that. Okay. And let's put that. Can we get that off? There's too much on this screen right now. See if I can move things around a little bit.
Oh,
And I don't know why this is down here. There we go. Okay. So in the days that chieftains ruled, so this is a story now, a narrative. It's set in a particular time. That is the time of Shoftim, of Judges. So the period of Judges is actually right after Joshua. The next book of the Bible is the book of Judges. This is a time when the tribes are settled in the land of Israel. There is no king. Local rulers or leaders are chosen largely in order to rule over their tribes, but also at times the tribes will join together, rarely against a common enemy. So we see that, for example, in the story of Deborah, we see it in the story of Samson. So these chieftains during this period, after the people are first settled in the land of Israel, is the period in which it is set. And it says there's a famine in the land, right? The famine is a problem. People can't eat. What are they going to do? And there is a man of Bethlehem in Judah. So we're told about the tribe, right? He lives in Bethlehem. And this is very ironic. Why? Bethlehem means the house of bread, right? Literally means the house of bread, but there is no bread, right? There's the whole book can be seen as a kind of movement from emptiness to fulfillment. That's sort of the arc of the book. And we're starting with emptiness, right? The cupboard is bare. They're in the house of bread, and there is no bread. So there is this man who, with his wife and 2 sons, leave Bethlehem and go to live in Moab, right? During this period of famine. Now, this is really striking because the people of Moab are an ancient enemy of the Jewish people, right? We saw that when we studied the book of Numbers. We see it so to a certain degree in the book of Deuteronomy when we studied it, because Moses, in his speeches talking about the history of the people, is very clear. The Moabites are very bad. A Moabite will never be able to enter the community of Israel. That's what the book of Deuteronomy says. Please remember that, because in this story, it ain't so, right? They will enter the community of Israel, one particular Moabite, and that, of course, is Ruth. Now, this is clearly a literary creation. And so there's a lot of symbolism in it, and we're going to start right here with the names. So Elimelech means God is my king. Not particularly significant, except that he is obviously a man of wealth and influence. And when he leaves, it's quite an event, as we'll see when Naomi comes back. It's an event. His wife's name is Naomi, and Naomi means pleasantness. And we'll hear her talk about that in a little while. And he has 2 sons whose names are Machlon and Helion. Now, the thing about Machlon and Helion is that their names, Machlon means sickness. Very odd thing to name your child, right? Helion means consumption in Hebrew. Guess what? These kids are not going to last beyond a verse or two, right? Right. So we have this couple and their two children from Bethlehem, and they come to Moab and they stay there. And remaining there is important because it's clear in the Hebrew um, that they go to reside, but the Hebrew is lagur. Lagur is to live temporarily, right? It's not really to live there in a serious way. And so we get this idea again and again in the biblical text, right? Lagur is to become a ger. It is to become a resident alien, right? But they're going to wind up staying there, as we're going to see, 10 years. Right? They're not just there temporarily, they become expats, if you will, in the land of Moab. Now, what happens during that period? Elimelech, Naomi's husband, dies. It's interesting that he's referred to as Naomi's husband. Well, we already know his name. We already know who he is. Nonetheless, she is the figure. She is the referent, right? Usually in the Bible, we see someone as the woman being described as the wife of the husband, right? Sarah is Abraham's wife. We don't talk about Abraham as Sarah's husband. Never defined that way. This is a book where women are prominent. So Elimelech dies. She, and again, the focus is on her, she's left with two sons. They marry Moabite women. Not only, I mean, these are Moabites, right? You would never marry a Moabite woman if you think about the biblical tradition. There's nothing said about this. Well, they're living in Moab. They married some of the local girls. The Moabite women in the Torah are the women who tempt the Israelites away from their service of God. Seems, they married some local girls. And they die. Both Machlon and Chilion, which, given their names, we knew this wasn't going to be good. And now she is left without her sons and without her husband. So she turns to her daughter-in-laws and she starts to return from the country of Moab, right? She's got nothing. She's heading home. And for in the country of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. God remembered them. This is a common theme, right? Taking note of. God took note of the plight of the Israelites in Egypt, right? And responded. So here they're getting food. And she's accompanied by her two daughter-in-laws. She leaves the place where she's been living and sets out on the road to the land of Judah. But she says to her two daughter-in-laws, so there's a general principle in biblical studies. Robert Alter in his commentaries points this out, that in a biblical story, the first words of a character are indicative of their character. Right? It's always interesting to look at the first thing that someone says after they're introduced in the Bible. So what does she say? And what does it tell us about the kind of person she is? Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. Let me stop there, because usually if someone goes back, they go back to their father's house. That's how the Bible describes it, right? This is Naomi, whose husband was Elimelech, telling her daughter-in-laws to go to their mothers. It's again, women, right? And look at the way she talks. May God deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me, right? It's a loving kind of blessing that she's giving them. And we'll see And so we go on that she is very concerned about her daughter-in-law's security. She really cares about them. Um, so she goes on, and may the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband. And she kisses them, and they start crying. So there's a very close relationship between Naomi and her Moabite daughters. Not so typical in families always, right? This is really quite striking. And they say, no, we will go with you. And Naomi doubles down. Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? She said, you stick with me, you'll never get married, right? Not good. You need a husband to provide for you. So I care about you. I appreciate your willingness to go with me. Not good. Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if there was hope for me, even if I married tonight, and I also bore sons, right? So I'm an old lady. I'm not going to have kids. Even if I had kids, would you wait? Should you, on their account, debar yourselves from marriage? Oh, no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours. For the Lord, the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. Essentially, my life is over. That's how she's feeling. You have a future. I have no. And they break into weeping, and Orpah kisses her mother-in-law farewell. But Ruth clings to her. You know what Orpah means? It means the back of the head in Hebrew. Just like Machlon and Chilion, right, are about being diseased, she turns her back on her mother-in-law. That's where she gets the name, Orpah. Okay, so now, Ruth, however, Davakba, she clings to her, she's stuck to her. Now, this might remind you of the beginning of Genesis, right? So after Eve is created from Adam's rib, the narrator says, and therefore a man should leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife so they could become one flesh. Right, so this notion of clinging, and I'm not suggesting there's some kind of physical relationship, sexual relationship here at all, but I am suggesting that there's something almost marital between the two of them, that the depth of their connection here is really profound. So Naomi now says to Ruth, look, your sister-in-law went to her people and her gods. Go follow her. It's interesting that she mentions her gods. And it's going to set up now what Ruth says to Naomi. And this, of course, if you know anything from the book of Ruth, it's likely that this is what you know. Ruth replies, don't urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. Right? So a couple of things here. The word lodge here, lalun, means to lie down for the night, right? It's you know, I wherever you lie down, I will lie down, right? And she is now taking on her mother-in-law's people as her people. And more than that, she's taking their God as her God. Right? No longer the Moabite gods. And therefore, if you see what Naomi said to her, your sister-in-law has returned what? To her people and to her God. And now Ruth says, I'll be part of your people. I'll worship your God. and where you die, I will die. Right? I am in this to the death, and there I will be buried. And thus may the Lord do to me. Already she's using the name of the Israelite God. Do to me, if anything but death parts me from, right? There's no way that I will be separated from you at all. And now Naomi stops arguing. So if you look back, you'll see that Naomi actually argues, tries to send her away 3 times. And the rabbis who want to see this as a conversion, and sort of in the way that there is no biblical notion of conversion, it doesn't exist in the Torah. This seems to be enough to make you an Israelite, right? Although she will always be a Moabite in some sense, but she is one who follows the God of Israel. They want to read in, and they do it in all different kinds of ways. They want to read this into conversion. They want her to go to the mikveh. They want her to observe Shabbat. And they find various verses in which they can kind of find that. And one thing about being converted, according to traditional rabbinic tradition, is that one is supposed to disparage a convert 3 times. Discourage them. Tell them it's going to be hard. All of that, right? Unlike other religious communities who want converts and are out to convert the world, Judaism was never like that, or not, I shouldn't say never, because there were periods, but by and large not. So here they're reading it in. They want to see it. And now when the 2 went on to Bethlehem until they reached Bethlehem. And they arrive in Bethlehem, and the whole city buzzes with excitement, right? So, first of all, Bethlehem's a small town. It's worth noting. It's not a big city, right? But it's 10 years later. They immediately recognize her, right? She was a significant person in Bethlehem. And they look at her and they say, could this be Naomi? She doesn't look the way she looked, right? But they sense who she is. They're looking at her. They kind of see Naomi there. They're asking themselves. And then Naomi says, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot bitter. You know that maror is bitterness, right? She's renaming herself here. She's describing herself as completely lost, right? Just overwhelmed by bitterness. By the way, this is a hard person to live with. This depressed, bitter woman. And it's striking that Ruth clings to her. Then she says something which really is surprising. I went away full, and the Lord brought me back empty. Well, her belly certainly wasn't full when she went away. They left because it was famine. And yet, in retrospect, she had a husband, and then she had 2 sons, and now she's really empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune on me? And this is a little bit of biblical parallelism, seems a little bit like poetry, right? Because the second statement mirrors the first one, right? The Lord has dealt harshly. Shaddai, another name for God, has brought misfortune on me. Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite, and arrived in Bethlehem at the time of the barley harvest. So Ruth has said, your people will be my people. She's still a Moabite. She will always be identified as a Moabite. So I have a friend who made Aliyah when he was in college. He's my age. We went to high school together. He's lived in Israel pretty much his whole life. He's made a profession there. He married a woman who's an Israeli. You know what they call it? They call him the American, right? I think it's kind of like that here. She is Israelite, and she arrives with her daughter Ruth. They arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. You know when the beginning of the barley harvest is? It's Pesach. You're going to see that the story will last from Pesach to Shavuot. And that's one of the reasons we read this on Shavuot, because it ends there. There are a variety of reasons. I'll talk about some more in a while. For right now, I'm going to stop sharing. Since we finished the first chapter, I want to open it up for questions if there are, or comments if there are. We'll start with Sandy.
So Rabbi, I don't know if this is true, but I read that Ruth descended from, well, Balak was her grandfather. So it went Balak and then Eglon and then Ruth, and Orpah was her sister.
Right. All of that is Midrash. There's no basis in the text at all for thinking that. And I think it's extremely unlikely. It's just, and this, after all, I'll just leave it there. I don't
Okay.
think.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah, Barry.
Last night, I sat in on a webinar given by Rabbi Sachs on intermarriage
Yes.
and halakhic, what he came up with as a halakhic explanation for why conservative Judaism can allow intermarriage.
Conservative Judaism does not allow intermarriage.
Well, but he's, you know, he's officially, yeah, you're right, and officially you're right. But he's arguing that there is a halakhic explanation for it, and he admits that the texts certainly overwhelmingly forbid intermarriage. But his argument was that the basis for that prohibition is because of the prohibition against idolatry, primarily.
Yes.
So what's key here, perhaps in Ruth's acceptance, is that she agrees to worship the gods of the Jewish people. That kind of trumps her being a Moabite.
I think it would be very hard to trump her being a Moabite if you look at the biblical tradition,
Yeah.
because it says specifically a Moabite can never become part of the people of Israel.
Yeah.
But I think this is an answer to that. I also think it's very interesting that this story might have been written, likely was written when the people come back from Babylonia. Now, the leaders of the people, when they come back from Babylonia, are Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra is the strongest statements against intermarriage. So this idea that you cannot intermarry, period, is now, this story is being written when the leadership is polemicizing against intermarriage. And so in some ways, it might be seen as a rebuttal to that in the community, which has that preached at them. Ezra once goes so far as to say, and if you are intermarried, you got to get rid of your wives. Not allowed to live with them. Not only can't you intermarry, but you have to end whatever relationship you're in. This is a very, very different story. Okay, good. If there's nothing else, yeah, Sandy?
I wonder why Ruth is so attached to Naomi. Is there anything in the text or anything? Why?
So I can only speculate. Ruth is the embodiment here of chesed, of goodness and of kindness. She sees Naomi needs her. Naomi is alone in the world. She's going back now, bereft. I went away full. I came back empty. Call me bitter.
Mm.
He's not going to abandon her. And I think that a lot of that's about character. Right? I'm reading between the lines, but that's how I would read it.
But Naomi doesn't seem to appreciate it.
Not at this point. I think we'll see that change dramatically. But at this point in the story, no, she doesn't appreciate it. In fact, she says, I came back empty.
Yeah.
I can imagine Ruth thinking, what am I, chopped liver? What do you mean you came back empty? Right? It's not Ruth's way to say that and maybe not even think it. Right, but we are struck, I think, by that fact. Okay, I'm going to move in. I'm not even sure we can get through much more. I mean, it's already late. So I want to get back at least to cover what we can, and maybe we'll finish next time if we have to. Okay, so let me go back to share screen. And we're on to chapter 2. So chapter 1 had been set in Moab, and now we're back in Bethlehem. Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance of the family of Elimelech, and he is called Boaz. So here's our next major figure. He is the only significant man in this story. Boaz means a man of strength. And we'll see that his strength is on a variety of levels. That's the meaning of Boaz. Now, he's called, it says a man of substance, but the Hebrew is Gibor Chayil, right? Or Ish Chayil. He's a man of, as a Chayil. And you should immediately think of Eshet Chayil, right? As we talk about a woman of valor. He's a man of valor. And Ruth the Moabite, wait, she's still a Moabite again and again and again, right? This is her last name, right? She can't escape it. She says to Naomi, I would like to go among the fields and glean among ears of corn behind someone who may show me kindness. So we have and Ruth says, yes, daughter, go. Now, remember that we were talking about the fact that a minute ago that Naomi doesn't seem to appreciate her. But look at that. She calls her daughter. Right. And that I think is striking. And I think it's deliberate. The text, it could have said simply, go. Right. And it's interesting that she's asking her mother-in-law for permission. Right? I mean, she doesn't need that. She's a grown woman. Right? What she's proposing is a little dangerous. Going gleaning in the fields, right, as a young woman, some of these reapers, if they like what they see, they may take it. So she's simply saying, if somebody will show me kindness, right? I should mention this whole idea of gleaning. We see it in the Bible. It is one of the things that the poor are entitled to. They're entitled to the gleanings of the field after the grain has been reaped, the barley has been reaped. Then people could follow along behind the reapers. And whatever fell to the ground, whatever ears of grain, in this case barley, fell, they could take and keep. So she goes off, and she came and gleaned in a field behind the reapers. As luck would have it, it was the piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family. So this statement, as luck would have it, right, just so happened, right? You can read this as you want. You could say, well, maybe she knew. Maybe that's where she thought perhaps she would find some favor. Or maybe this is like, God behind the scenes rewarding her for her loyalty. And speaking of God, if you think back to last week in the Song of Songs, and I mentioned that God is never mentioned in the Song of Songs. God is here all the time, everywhere. Everybody's talking about God, right? God has dealt harshly with me. God has looked after me. Your God will be my God, right? And it's just going to continue, and we're going to see it. So she's there, and she's gleaning. And Boaz comes from Bethlehem, so he doesn't live in Bethlehem. His land holdings are just outside. Again, a very small city. And he greets the reapers. Adonai yimachem, may the Lord be with you. And they say, may God bless you, right? A lot of God talk, right? And also look at the relationship between Boaz and his workers. What kind of a boss is he, right? He's blessing them, right? There's no sense of, you guys get back to work. How come you've only, done 5 rows? I've been gone for an hour. What's going on, right? Not at all. There's almost something familial about the way he talks to him. And then he says to the servant who is in charge of the reapers, right? His factotum, whose girl is that? Who is that? And the servant says, she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. So he knows who he is, who she is. And she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested but little in the hut. Right. So there we see a reference to her character, right? That she's very hardworking, she's industrious, she doesn't take breaks. And I wanted to go back again. Remember what I said about the first statement a person makes is indicative of their character. Look at what the first statement that Boaz had made. The Lord be with you, right? We know exactly what kind of person he is. Okay, and now we're going to see more about his personality. So Boaz now addresses Ruth, listen to me, daughter, right? He knows who she is. He is related to her, and he speaks to her using the same word that Naomi used. Listen to me, daughter. Don't go somewhere else. Stay here close to my girls, right? So keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you. Remember what I said, right? This is not uncommon, right? When you're thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water. Not necessarily a privilege of a gleaner, right? And she falls on the floor and she says, why are you so kind to single me out? But I'm a foreigner. Why do you care about me? And Boaz says, I have been told of all you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, and how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. Okay, so Boaz is explaining what Ruth did. Who does she sound like? She is the one who left her father and her mother and went from the land of her birth to something unknown that should go. The bells should be ringing.
Abraham.
Lech lecha me'artzecha, go, God says to Abraham, from your native land, from your father's house. What? To that unknown place that I will show you. Ruth is being viewed, her journey is being viewed like Abraham's.
Hmm.
His was the journey to the land. She is returning to that land. And that is really striking. If you want to think, how important is Ruth? What kind of figure is Ruth in the biblical imagination? To say that she is like Abraham is really implicit, is really something. And just to get ahead of myself, because we're not going to have a lot of time, Ruth becomes the progenitor of King David, who will be the king of Israel, right? So she is very important. She comes back to the land, and really, as a result of her, right, the Jews are going to prosper in that land. He goes on to say, may the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. So God's wings, right, is an interesting statement. His knafot, his wings. We have this image in the lead up to Sinai. I want to emphasize that because in some ways this is like Sinai, and it's got to do and suggest why it's read on Shavuot, right? God bore us out of Egypt. The language is on eagle's wings. And that's where the Jewish people at Sinai will, in some sense, convert. They will make God their God, right? So this language becomes the language when we do conversion. We talk about the person coming under God's wings, sheltered under the wings of God, right? So again, he blesses her just as he blesses his workers. And she says, you are most kind to comfort me, to speak gently to me. I am not so much as one of your maids. I'm nobody, and yet you're being so kind to me. So at this point, what we have, this meeting is between two people who are both what we would call ba'alei chesed, masters of kindness. Ruth is kind to her mother-in-law. Boaz is kind to her, right? So at mealtime, Boaz says, come partake of the meal. Eat with us. Gleaners are not invited to lunch. It's just not done. Eat with us. Dip your morsel in vinegar. This was a classic food. It's not just vinegar, it's vinegar and oil mixed together. Like salad dressing, really, right? Dip your morsel in vinegar. So she sits down beside the reapers. He hands her roasted grain, and she eats her fill and has some left over. He gives her more than she can eat. And she is going to take that home. Lunch, the leftovers, she gets it to go. She's going to take it home to give it to Naomi. And she gets up, and Boaz orders the workers, you are not only to leave her to glean among the sheaves without interference. You have to pull up some stalks, right? And leave them for her, not the leftovers. You work for her like you're working for me, right? It's unbelievable. Oh, I forgot to mention something, so I will go back. He called her daughter, and that suggests something else. She's a lot younger than he is. She's a generation or two younger. She's more Naomi's contemporary than Ruth's contemporary. And we'll see that at the later on, he will say, when she says she wants to marry him, essentially, she says, you could have had somebody much younger. So she gleans until evening. She beat out what she had gleaned. It is about an ephah of barley. An ephah is 2/3 of a barrel. This is a lot of barley. And no wonder, because not only has she been gleaning, but the workers have been working for her. And she carries it down to town where her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She took out and gave her what she had left over after her eating her fill. Her mother-in-law says, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you. So she told her mother, whom she worked with, the name of the man I work for is Boaz. Naomi says, blessed be the Lord who's not failed in his chesed. Naomi has chesed, Boaz has chesed, and God has chesed. Naomi explained to her daughter, he is a redeeming kinsman. And Ruth said, even said to me, stay close by my workers until the harvest is finished. When is the harvest going to be finished? Shavuos. She shows up on Pesach. She's going to work till Shavuot, the period of the Omer, which we are right in the middle of. And Naomi says, it's best that you go out with these girls, not to be annoyed in another field. She's not tipping her hand exactly. She says, well, that's a good place to work. Right? So she stays with Boaz, gleans until the wheat harvest was finished, the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law. That brings us to the end of chapter 2, which is really all we have time for. So we will pick up next time. And we will read chapters 3 and 4. And then we're going to go on to Ecclesiastes. We have time for questions, a good amount of time. So please feel free. Questions, observations. I don't want to get into the next chapter, so you can ask questions not only about what we've read, anything you want, if there are any questions. Surprisingly not. Okay. Well, in that case, just trying to think. All right, let me mention at least let me mention why it is that we read this story on Shavuot. Why is that tradition? So I've already alluded to the fact that this takes place during the period of the Omer, which culminates in Shavuot. So the dramatic ending of the story, which we'll see next week, actually happens then. Secondly, Ruth is, at least in the biblical view, and it's the rabbis who decided that Shavuot is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah, right? That's nowhere in the Torah. According to the Torah, Shavuot is an agricultural festival. That's all that's said about it. Unlike Passover and Sukkot, which in the Torah have a historical association, right? Passover is about the Exodus from Egypt. Sukkot is about the period of the wanderings when people dwelled in booths. Shavuot is the end of the harvest. It's a harvest festival. So the rabbis make it about Torah. And they say, actually, it's when the Torah was given. So what does that mean? It means that it is the time at which the people of Israel accept God as their God, and they make a covenant with God. God says, they say, you will be our God, we will be your people. It's that formal proclamation. And God says, okay, here's what you have to do, right? So it is, in some sense, a moment of conversion. Or you can look at it as, that is, a convert is one who pledges, your God will be my God, right? So you can see it that way here. Ruth is making the covenant also. So I think that's probably the second reason. And then the last one, as I mentioned earlier, is that Ruth, and I will talk about the whole line, but Ruth is the progenitor of King David. Right? According to tradition, David was born and died on Shavuot. So that alone might be enough to suggest if we're going to read a book on Shavuot, that would be the book that we read. Since that tradition comes from the same rabbis who made Shavuot about Torah. Okay, so with that, now you've had a few more minutes to think, and I have 5 more minutes if there are any questions. Still no. This is almost unprecedented. I don't remember a single time where there have been no questions. So be it. Have a great week. Next week, we are going to finish Ruth, and fairly quickly, I think, although there's what to talk about. And then we will go on and look at Ecclesiastes. And actually, Ecclesiastes is a good book. We don't need a full session for it because it is just wisdom literature. It's filled with aphorisms about the nature and meaning of life. There's no story there, and we don't have to read them all. So we will definitely finish Ruth and finish the book of Ecclesiastes next week, and then on to Jonah and our final session. With that note, I want to wish you all a great week, and I will see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.